Let's start our afternoon session with Mark Schleusener. He's a state statistician at USDA-NASS, based out of Springfield, Illinois. Hey, good afternoon to you, Mark. It's good to hear from you. I know you've got a busy week this next coming week with some NASS results, but we're going to talk about a different survey today. Can you tell me about that, please?
You bet. And thank you, Todd, for the introduction. Thank you, Eliana, and all the team for hosting. I will be talking about a nutrient loss reduction strategy survey that we conducted about a year ago. This is the opening slide I use at almost all my presentations, and it basically says I've been a lifer with NASS for quite a while. I will add one thing. Because I have the dreaded right after lunch spot, I'm going to teach you all how to pronounce my last name. It is 11 letters long. It is difficult to spell. It is difficult to say. And this is how you remember. Schleusener rhymes with poisoner. So please take that with you. If you see me on the street, don't call me poisoner, call me Schleusener. For about the last 7 years, I've been doing communication and outreach as the state statistician for Illinois. And this is a job of the organization that I work for. We provide timely, accurate, and useful statistics in service to U.S. agriculture. When we conducted the survey, the reference year was 2019. We wanted to draw a sample of cropland farmers, but we kind of wanted to exclude the fruit and vegetable people. We were after the more common field crops of corn, soybeans, and wheat. We put a floor on the sample, the size of the farm of 100 acres, and we also put a ceiling on the top of 5,000. And we drew a sample of almost 1,100 farms in that range of 100 acres to 5,000 acres, excluding the fruits and vegetables. We conducted 2 mailings in January of 2020. Remember, the reference year was 2019. And then a few weeks later, we conducted another mailing of just the non-respondents, and we began calling the people who did not respond in the middle of April. All of our funding came from INREC. Thank you, Julie, and the rest of that team. In terms of the accuracy of the numbers I'm going to show you, for the common items like cropland or perhaps like tiled acres, one standard error is less than 10% of the statistics that I'm showing. Less than 10% standard error for common items. For less common items, let's say cover crops, we're looking at a standard error of 20% or perhaps more. And for some items that are quite rare, bioreactors, the margins of error are very large because they're very rare items, and a sample size of 1,000 doesn't catch them very well. Our response rate was good. It was better than the last 2 surveys. So mostly when I produce these results, I compare to the official statistics that NASS published. So in the 2019 crop season, there was 10.5 million acres of corn planted. And based on questions we asked to our sample, something like 35% of the acres were planted by someone who used the MRTN strategy to help determine their application rate for nitrogen. The MRTN strategy is somewhat new and perhaps somewhat misunderstood, and we're not exactly sure that everyone knows exactly what MRTN means, but this is the response we got: 3.7 million acres. Other industry techniques, that can include things like, there are many farm management software companies. Let's think of Climate Field View, Farmer's Edge, and they are providing advice for a fee to producers on how to fertilize their fields and when to plant and all these various things. And so that would fall into the category of other industry approved techniques. That would also include if someone consulted a certified a CCA. And notice that the 2 percentages, the 70 and the 35, add up to more than 100. Think about this. People can consider one strategy and then consider another strategy, and they may actually apply a 3rd strategy. We're asking what they use to help determine their application rates, not if they exactly followed some specific strategy. Now I'm looking at nitrogen acres applied in the fall and winter with a nitrification inhibitor. I've got almost 1.5 million acres, 1.46. And recall this, I'm comparing, that's 14% of the total acres of corn in Illinois. And remember, not all those acres of corn are on tiled acres. I do not know of any statistic that says there are this many acres of corn on tiled ground. I don't think that number exists. There are about 9.5 million tiled acres in Illinois, and something like half of them are on corn and something like half of them are on soybeans. But there are no official statistics that I know of on that. So from the questions we asked to our survey respondents, they told us they fertilized about 1.5 million acres in the fall and winter with a nitrification inhibitor, and then about 2.2 million acres in the spring of 2019 with the nitrification inhibitor. And there are similar answers for the non-tiled acres. The reason these are very specific things is we're trying to measure exact details of the actual nutrient loss reduction strategy. We're trying to find out if farmers are following specific best management practices. And this slide is about when they applied the nitrogen. So there's very specific strategy in the NLRS where the fall and winter nitrogen was 50% or less of the total nitrogen. And that was about 3% of acres, not very much actually. And think about this, if someone applied 51% of their nitrogen in the fall, they don't fit that strategy. If they were close to it, but if they did 52, 55, 60%, they don't fall into that category. And so we're getting a low number of 3%. The second strategy is where it's all spring. No nitrogen in the fall or winter. We got about 16% of corn acres. And that third strategy is what some people call spoon feeding. There was some nitrogen applied in the fall and winter, and some was applied in the spring before planting, and then also some was applied after planting in the side dress. And those are the numbers we got for those. We asked about reductions in phosphorus, and we compared back to a baseline year of 2011. And there's actually been a big change. Something like 7.4 million acres tiled acres have reduced phosphorus application since 2011. Now that is referring to all cropland, not just corn. So it's a combination of corn and soybean acres. And for the non-tiled, we've got 3.8 million. We also have some statistics on where they change the method of application. Just broadcast phosphorus on the surface of the ground, subsurface applications. One of the reasons for this big change is probably the variable rate technology that is becoming very common. And I think it's backed up by the statistic on the soil test information. Nearly 9.5 million acres were reduced phosphorus applications based on soil tests. That's in the bottom right. We have some cover crop statistics. We asked for the level of knowledge about these various things. And in particular, we found the nutrient loss reduction strategy is not widely known. More than half of the respondents were slightly knowledgeable or not at all knowledgeable about the NLRS. And similar numbers for the MRTN, where we've got basically 59% of the survey respondents in the slightly knowledgeable or not at all. Similar for wood chip bioreactors and constructed wetlands, but in cover crops, that knowledge has increased very nicely. Next slide, please, Eliana, and I'm basically done.
I'm taking a look to see whether we have any questions for you. I don't see any off of the top of my head, Mark, at this point. So I think we can move on at this time. Thank you, Mark, for being with us today and for running through the survey. I do appreciate that. Will there be, I guess I do have some questions as, will there be follow-ups on this survey from USDA-NASS?
We are planning a repeat of the survey. I wouldn't call it a follow-up of the previous. We'll do a brand new random sample.
Then how often will that take place?
There are some discussions about that. Currently, we're on an every other year schedule where the odd numbered year is the reference year.
Okay, we'll look forward to.
Without a big change, we would conduct the survey in 2022 with 2021 as the reference year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's Mark Schleusener. He is the state statistician at the University of Illinois in the state of Illinois, and of course with USDA-NASS. Let's move on now. If we can introduce Dr. Reid Christianson. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Crop Sciences right here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois, focusing on how land management impacts water quality and tracking these impacts through time. Thank you so much for being with us, Reid. We appreciate you taking the time with us today and working through the next 15 minutes or so.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm on here to talk about some new scenarios or some additional scenarios that we've been working on to include in the next biennial report. And really, when I say scenario, what I mean is a hypothetical group of conservation practices combined together to reach on paper our water quality goals. And these are high level kind of scenarios. They're statewide, state level scenarios. They're not prescriptive in any way, fully realizing that every farm has a unique set of conservation practices and management practices that may or may not work on that farm. So with that said, we'll hop into the scenarios and what we were doing and why we were doing this. One of the big reasons we were looking at adding scenarios in addition to the ones that were in the original strategy was because we didn't have any that reflected our interim water quality goals, our 2025 water quality goals. And those are a 15% nitrogen loss reduction, a 25% total phosphorus loss reduction, and then a combined scenario with nitrogen and phosphorus. In my mind, even more important than representing those interim goals was to align scenarios with available data sources. We've got a couple of biennial reports under our belt now, and we have a pretty good sense of which data streams will be available in the future, which really helps us out because we can let those data kind of drive how we develop these scenarios. Now we have things on the books where we know how well they work on the water quality front, and we know we can track them over time. So developing those scenarios to align with them very well lets us easily track and look at progress over time. And again, these scenarios are being used as a metric, basically a tracking metric, something that we can compare against, whether we're putting more acres of a certain practice in, or whether we're losing those over time, and then maybe why. All of these scenarios have point source reductions included as a line item. And to be consistent with the original strategy, we used all of the same practice efficiencies, so the nitrogen and phosphorus reduction efficiencies from the original science assessments, which were included in the original nutrient strategy. Quick snapshot of the practices we used in the scenarios then. Again, these are these practices have a nutrient reduction effectiveness or efficiency value developed, and we have a way to track them over time. So we're looking at, on the x-axis, we have the practice, the management practice or the conservation practice. And then on the left-hand axis there, we have a percent reduction. So the blue bars are nitrogen, orange bars are phosphorus. All the stuff on the left part of the screen here focuses on nutrient management. And then we have cover crops and conservation tillage, which are infield practices, bioreactors, wetlands, and buffers on non-tile drained land, which are our edge of field practices here that we've included. And then the land use change practice. If you look at this really close, you can see there are really only three practices here that provide both nitrogen and phosphorus reduction at the same time with one practice. Okay. So a little bit more background here before we get into the scenarios. The time period between 1997 and 2011 is the benchmark period for Illinois. So that's when we had information where we were able to start allocating the statewide loads for the nutrients into sectors, right? So point source, non-point source, or agricultural, non-point source, and then urban stormwater. So that 2011 year is pivotal in all of these scenarios that have been developed. It's serving as the backdrop, the comparison year. So when we're talking about adding additional acres to meet water quality goals, we're really talking about adding additional acres above and beyond what was on the ground in 2011. We've also included a practical maximum for all of the conservation practices. This is a ceiling, it's serving as a ceiling, and so we can't have more acres in that practice than that ceiling. And a really good, easy example for this is thinking about a nitrogen management practice like the maximum return to nitrogen application rate. That applies to only corn acres. So that serves, the corn acre serves as that practical maximum or as that upper ceiling. All of the scenarios have gone through a rough cost optimization, a real simple procedure where we're looking at the least expensive practice, maxing that out or pushing that up to the ceiling, moving on to the next least expensive practice, pushing that up to the ceiling, and so on until we meet the water quality goals for that particular scenario. Now, the scenarios as they stand now include all of the original costs from the nutrient loss reduction strategy, though we are starting to look and review those costs to make sure that they are still representative of all of those practices. One quick note, we will be making the spreadsheet that was used to develop these scenarios available. So that should be available at either the end of this year or the beginning of the next year after comments have been worked in. And we've included in there a tab for you guys to do your own what if scenarios, typing in whatever acres you want or a combination of acres you'd like to see, and looking at the resulting impact on water quality. Okay. A quick overview of the scenarios here. We've got 6 core scenarios. We were picking up on the naming convention from the original strategy. So we've got scenarios with an N, starting with an N, are nitrogen focused scenarios, so focused on nitrogen only. Scenarios with a P are focused on phosphorus only, and then N and P together are the combined scenarios. The original strategy left off with scenario 6. We're picking up on scenario 7. So scenario 7, N7, P7, and NP7 represent those interim water quality goals. So the 15% nitrate loss reduction and 25% total phosphorus loss reduction. The number 8s, N8, P8, and NP8 are representing the full or the 45% reduction goals. We do have a handful of what if scenarios, extended, I was calling them extended scenarios. I'm not going to get into much detail of those, but they're kind of the reason we put those in there. What if we had more information? What if we had more information on what was happening on tillage or how the various tillage practices impacted water quality? What if we knew more about saturated buffers? What if how many acres would it take to meet all of our water quality goals with just land use conversion? What if we only did nutrient management? And what if we only did stuff in the field? Where does that get us? So just answering some of those questions that are trying to answer some of those questions that are kind of common. The figure on the right here represents those 6 core scenarios. And the orange bar is representing the number of acres impacted. And I know the first thing you're going to say is we don't have 50 million acres in the state. Yes, I understand that. I tried to explain that with a little caret down here at the bottom or underneath this figure. But what that's saying is that we need more than one conservation practice on every ag acre in the state to meet those water quality goals for that scenario. So it's really more representing the magnitude of the effort rather than the true number of acres impacted. And the way this tally works is if we have 1 acre of farm ground that's doing nitrogen management, phosphorus management, conservation tillage, and cover crops, that 1 acre is counted 4 times because we've got 4 different practices on that acre. Now, there's a very big gap in literature on the combined impact of suites of conservation practices. What really is the water quality impact if you have all 4 of those practices on 1 acre. We're starting to ask that question, but there's been very little work actually showing the answer. So once science matures a little bit, or that the science of stacked practices matures, I think we'll probably be able to start reducing this double counting here in a figure like this. All that said, though, when we get into the details of the scenarios, we can start thinking about each individual conservation practice and the level of implementation for that, rather than trying to think about all of them together. Okay, we're not going to go through all the scenarios. We're just going to go through a couple of them here. Here's scenario NP7. So this is the combined interim scenario. We've got a couple of different tables for each one. Here's a summary table representing the overall scenario with the statewide nitrogen phosphorus reductions. We've got point sources represented on here, and then we have agriculture represented here down closer to the bottom. If you look pretty much all the way to the right, we have an equal annualized cost savings. That would be cost savings due to nitrogen and phosphorus rate reductions. To the left of that, we have the equal annualized cost. So that's the cost of implementing conservation practices. And then to the left of that, we have the net. So that's the cost minus the cost savings. I thought it was pretty important to show all 3 of these for transparency, just to make sure we're clear that yes, we may have cost savings, but that may be come in a different form, and the cost savings may be directly to a farmer, for example. From there, we dive into the details of each of the scenarios here, where we have the conservation practice included in the scenario on the left. Right next to that, we have the nitrogen and phosphorus reduction efficiencies associated with each conservation practice. And then we have 3 different columns that have acres in them. The first column is the treated area needed. That's the total area needed across the state for this scenario, for that one practice, to meet the water quality goal on paper. Next to that is how many acres we had on the ground in 2011. Next to that is how many is pretty simple math. The treated area minus the number of acres we had in 2011 gives you the increased treated area needed above and beyond what we had in 2011 to meet those water quality goals for this particular scenario. All the way on the far right, we have the tracking source for each of the conservation practices. You see the NASS surveys on there quite a bit, and thank you again. It's a wonderful source of information that we have available to us. We also have several columns here with a percentage and statewide nitrogen reduction, statewide agricultural nitrogen reduction, and then we have the phosphorus reductions as well. Those 2 numbers are different because one is looking at the entire load from the state and what impact does that one practice have on the entire state, the load from the state. And then the statewide agricultural nitrogen reduction just zooms into the agricultural sector and its share, basically its share of the nitrogen and what impact that practice is having on that share. Okay, graphically, we can take a look at this, the scenarios like this, where we're looking at the individual practices on the x-axis on the bottom here. The gray bar is representing the benchmark year, so how many acres were on the ground in 2011. The blue bar represents how many acres we need, and then the orange bar is just the difference between those 2, so how many additional acres we need above 2011 to meet this scenario. And the winners for this combined scenario, NP7, are bioreactors, which were maxed out in this scenario, and then reducing phosphorus application rates based on soil testing, reducing rates on high and very high soil test phosphorus soils. That was maxed out, and then conservation tillage was maxed out for this scenario. Now we're zooming all the way over to the full nitrogen phosphorus, or NP8, which is the full 45% reduction for both nitrogen and phosphorus. And this is what I'm calling the all-in scenario. it's going to take everything we've got to meet that 45% reduction. So we've maxed out all of the typical conservation practices, including cover crops, and we're bringing in buffers on non-tile drain land just to fill in the little bit of gap that we had left over at the end. That particular practice is one of our more expensive practices, so it just came in at the very end to fill that gap. Okay. So I'm out of time. I'm going to stop at this slide here with the extended scenarios. Leave those up on the screen. You guys can take a look. Again, these are just what if scenarios. What if we did this or that? And I'll leave it there. And I'd be happy to take questions when we get to that point.
We do have a couple of quick questions for you. Are the practice efficiencies, Reid, the same as when Mark David did his scenarios for the original KNLRS?
They are the same.
If they stayed the same, is that because they were verified?
They are the same, and they have not been updated, or the science, nobody's petitioned to update those through the science assessment team yet. And the reason for that is because we just created a procedure to update or add new conservation practices or update old conservation practices to the strategy. So that's up on the website right now, and it was included in this last biennial report. So we're hoping to have the science on the conservation practice front start to move forward and start updating those efficiencies as we go forward in time.
Do we have any indication of the differences between those cropping, livestock, and other non-source point delivery methods into the system?
Well, that's a really good question. And I've seen that question has been kind of asked several times, and it's funny, the livestock piece has really been largely left out. I know there's some reasons for that. There's some assumptions that were initially made that manure gets incorporated, manure from confined operations gets spread on crop fields. So that's part of the nutrient application issue potentially. But no, there is some work. I'll have to say there is some work that's going on or going to start happening in Kentucky. By the University of Kentucky is going to start put together a workshop to start looking at and answering some of the livestock conservation practice questions. It was supposed to be this last summer, but it got pushed back due to COVID. So,
Reid, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is Reid Christianson. He's an assistant professor at the Department of Crop Sciences here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois. We'll move through the rest of the afternoon now very quickly with just 10-minute quick updates with a couple of questions, or a couple of minutes, 4 questions after each and every presenter. So if you have questions, be sure you put them in right away. Otherwise, I won't see them quickly enough, and we will move on. Our first presenter is Kristi Jones, who has served in the state government for over 10 years and currently serves as the deputy director at the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and she is with the Agriculture Water Quality Partnership Forum. Kristi, thanks for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Todd. Good afternoon, everyone.
I didn't give you time to put your share screen up. That's okay. If you can, you don't have to hurry on that. We'll get to it. Just a reminder, if you do have questions while Kristi is speaking or any of the others, make sure you tap them out as quickly as possible. Kristi?
Todd, can you see my screen?
I can.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Kristi Jones, Deputy Director at the Illinois Department of Agriculture, here to talk about the Agriculture Water Quality Partnership Forum and our activities in this past year. As a quick reminder, the screen has a list of members to the forum. Really consists of federal and state agencies, commodity groups, universities and academia and other areas of research, and NGOs. I want to remind everyone that in the original plan, The objectives for this group were laid out and thought I would go through those. It's really an opportunity for the diverse membership to come together and share what is being done, whether it be in research or on in-field implementation. So to steer and coordinate outreach and educational efforts to help farmers address nutrient loss and select BMPs, and identify needed educational initiatives or training for farmers and technical advisors. So with both of those dot points really leads me to think of field days as an example. To strengthen connections between industry initiatives, certified crop advisor, continuing education requirements, state initiatives, and other technical services. To track BMPs, and really what we look at is a menagerie of information, but some examples are the DNR CREP numbers, data from NRCS, from FSA, the NASS survey results that Mark Schleusener presented, Trevor sample and EPA 319 projects, and then the Illinois Department of Agriculture Transect survey. Coordinate cost share and targeting, and when I hear the word targeting, it makes me think of priority watersheds, and then develop other tools as needed. We had 2 meetings in 2020. Believe it or not, we were lucky enough to have an in-person meeting right before many of us started working from home. And then in October, we just met recently virtually. So I'm going to take you a step back to the February 27th meeting. We looked at best management practice tracking sources, and the group agreed to continue to use the same sources as in the past, such as the NASS survey, and to seek additional sources such as FSA cover crop data and IFCA survey information as appropriate. So really looking at expanding sources. Another topic was the mapping of filter strips in total phosphorus priority watersheds. The group discussed the Iowa mapping project and the possibility of a similar project in Illinois. That Iowa project was between the state and Iowa State University, where they reviewed maps through GIS and they digitized the implementation of items such as wascobs or grass waterways. And the point of that was to have a baseline document, and their intention is to continue that project annually. Of course, there is a large price tag to implement something similar in the state of Illinois. Additional implementation scenario development. Back in February, we were just discussing the concept, and we've come a long way as the presentation that you just reviewed from Dr. Christianson. The Rock River watershed nitrate load. Trevor sample from IEPA showed the increased nitrate load in the Rock River watershed, and the forum had some conversations around that. One of the items that came up from Department of Agriculture is that that area, that watershed, has a unique groundwater situation, and further research will be done into irrigation potentially being linked to the increased loads. Finally, discussed the biennial report. There is a significant amount of information, specifically in the ag chapter, and talked about potentially putting some of that in the appendices, but the group agreed that there's very critical information in that chapter, and they would like to keep it all in one spot and not lost in the appendices. Jumping ahead to our October 20th meeting, Dr. Christianson gave the presentation that you were all able to just view. Mark Schleusener gave the NASS survey results, the 2019 NASS survey results that you all had the opportunity to review this afternoon. The Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association highlighted their 4R metrics survey. And then we talked about the reporting spreadsheet, something that is very important to the nutrient loss reduction strategy and the reports. There's an in-depth reporting spreadsheet for BMPs and activities from many groups, whether it is academia, NGOs, state and federal agencies. And so Anna Marshall is looking at making that spreadsheet more user-friendly because for many of us, we are putting several things into the report, such as meetings that we're attending and educational efforts that we're putting on. There's also the Ag Water Quality Partnership Forum technical subgroup membership, and those members are listed on the screen. The objectives are also listed, and overall, we are preparing for the collection of data for the next nutrient loss reduction strategy report, and we intend to meet in December of 2020, so coming right up. Want to open it for a couple of questions while being cognizant of time. And I also have Brian Renneker, the Bureau Chief of Land and Water Resources for the department, is also on the line.
Kristi, just very quickly, you and Brian can stick around for a bit. Folks are having a tough time tapping questions out quickly enough for me to get them asked before we move on. So I thought maybe we would just hold everything to the end. So if you could stop sharing. Are you able to stick around? Yes?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll move on here very shortly. Trevor Sample is with us. And by the way, continue to write those questions in. We'll just hold them all to the end here and get those answered at the end of the hour. Trevor joins us, Sample that is, from Illinois EPA. And he serves as the agency coordinator for the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. Trevor, you can go ahead, please.
Thank you, Todd. Can you hear me and see my presentation?
Yes, I can.
Very good. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending today. I'll be giving an overview of the Nutrient Monitoring Council and the one meeting that we had this year. Let's start off showing our council membership, mostly agencies that are involved with water quality monitoring. I'd like to note that we do have two new members this year. James Lamer from the Illinois Natural History Survey joined us, and Brian Meskey is now the representative from the Department of Natural Resources. Again, our objective is to look at water quality data as it relates to nutrients, so we can look at those 5-year running averages and loads, and look at them from priority watersheds and also the rest of the Huck 8 watersheds in Illinois, so that can be updated into our biennial reports. We did have one meeting this year. It was in June, and we had 5 speakers who covered these range of topics that I will now give an overview of. Dr. Greg McIsaac gave statewide and major river nitrate and total phosphorus load updates. He used the same calculation methods that he has in the past for these updates, looking at load and yield using USGS and Illinois EPA data. And he uses linear interpolation for nitrate and the WRTDS model for phosphorus. So this table shows the statewide results for the river flows. So on the left, we have our baseline lows from 80 to 96. We have the updated 2013 to 17 numbers that were in the previous biennial report. And then he updated the 5-year averages for 2014 to 2018 and also 2015 to 2019. So looking at the 14 to 18, we see that flow was up 9% over the baseline. Nitrate loads are actually down 4.4%, but phosphorus was up statewide 21%. Looking at 2015 to 19, had a very large rainfall year, so we saw a 25% increase over the baseline in flow, which resulted in a 13% nitrate load increase and 37% load phosphorus increase. So this is a graph showing the annual water yield by year, and as you can see, 19 actually surpassed what has previously been our high mark in 1993 for water yield. So that really drove a lot of the increase in loading. This is the same graph with the nitrate data on top of it, and the same graph showing the total phosphorus data. He also looked at the 8 major river basins and noted changes. So this is changes from baseline. So any of the bars are above the 0 axis is an increase, anything below is a decrease. So we continue to see, if you look at the 2015 to 19, we still see increases in phosphorus in the Illinois River and among the other basins. Changes in nitrate loads, we saw some small increases in some of the watersheds, but in the rock, you see the red bar there for the rock for the 2015 to 19, still seeing large increases in nitrate from the Rock River. So why is this? Well, we have some potential answers, or maybe we should say potential research questions to look at in the future, which is looking at groundwater, potentially some higher denitrification in the streams back in the baseline period, any changes in ag practices since the baseline period, such as irrigated acres, or lack of tile that's now has been installed. So those are just some potential research questions we could look into. Moving now to the USGS Super Gauge Network. For the last 5 years, Illinois EPA has cost shared these gauges with USGS, with that running out in March of 2021, with monitoring ceasing in September 2020. And this summer, our agency was able to step up with some funding to continue operating these gauges for 1 more year. We will still be looking for continued sources of funding to keep that network going. Moving now to the Hypoxia Task Force update I gave. We attended the Hypoxia Task Force meeting in Washington, D.C. in February, Kristi, Jones, and I. And one of the outcomes of that was setting up a lot of work groups similar to what we have here in Illinois. And one of those was the Water Quality Monitoring Work Group. Casey Lee with the USGS serves as the coordinator for this, and I serve as a state co-chair. Our main goal is to write a proposal and a business case for establishing a Mississippi River Basin monitoring network that would capture nutrient loads from each of the states. We know each state is individually using data to calculate what their annual loadings are, but what does that network look like basin-wide? Are there any gaps that we can fill in where we could be capturing some data, but there's no gauges or monitoring stations there, and what would that cost? So we've been holding monthly calls on that. US EPA is contracted with Tetra Tech to help us out on some of the technical issues with that, and they'll be looking for some of those data gaps that I talked about. Moving now to the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association Water Quality Improvement Act. Greg Good gave an update of this. This was something that was initiated with the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, which is an organization of states from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri. And they work on issues for the Upper Mississippi River. So they've been talking about how each state is individually implementing their strategies, but when it comes to monitoring and some of the data, that there are some gaps that we could try to fill in and have a program to work more on the Upper Mississippi River Basin as a whole. So they have this federal act that looks to create a Mississippi River Program Office that would be administered by NRCS and US EPA, much like the Great Lakes program has, asking for significant money to implement state nutrient reduction strategies, primarily on ag and urban non-point source components, look at modeling and research, better communication between everyone. And again, it is asking for hundreds of millions of dollars to be allocated to this. And you can see the bill sponsors on this are listed below. Moving now to the next speaker, Eliana Taylor from Current Innovation gave a talk about H2 Now Chicago. It's a waterway monitoring program where they are monitoring from these locations using volunteers. They are using the sensor technology to estimate microbial levels in different places of the Chicago River. She shows some of the results that they have to date for that. And talk about some of their 2020 goals moving forward, which is to improve their data availability, achieve higher accuracy and precision, communicate the limitations of their data set, streamline data collection, and to engage their network of volunteers. They are looking for additional volunteers, so if you're in the Chicago area and would like to participate in this, you can contact Current and they can help set you up with that. Our last speaker was Ted Crashmer with the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center, and he gave an update on the NLRS data portal and hypoxia task force and trends working group, talking about the Great Lakes to Gulf Virtual Observatory. We've seen updates on this in the past. It's a web-based geospatial application. It's basically an interactive map that integrates a lot of the water quality data that states are using for their nutrient strategies. And they have tools for downloading the data and looking at the data from different angles. So they do have a new interface to explore some of the raw data for the ambient data from our agency and the super gauge data from USGS, as well as integrating other sources. They looked at additional visualization and interactive exploration of data outputs from the biennial report, meaning those yield and loading maps that we had in the biennial report from this new updated science assessment are now a part of that. So you can look at Huck 8 summaries, yearly statewide loads, and the major basins. They also added a pretty neat narrative storyboard that they can continue to add to. So they're also looking at progress tracking through the entire basin, looking at flow normalized loads. They've been working with the Hypoxia Task Force Trends Working Group on looking at long-term sentinel sites and data sets. They have been working on a project with Dr. Christianson, looking at how maybe we can add some of our best management practice data to this map. And then also looking at including innovative remote monitoring of cover crops and that relation to water quality. So for the future enhancements, they want to continue looking at these items that I just talked about, and they also have a side project for looking at water quality data inventory of the lower Mississippi main stem as well. So that was a update of the meeting that we had back in June. I'd just like to point out that Greg Good has served as the chair of the Nutrient Monitoring Council since 2015. He's overseen 15 of our meetings. He is asked to step down as chair. He's not retiring yet, but he's stepping away from some of his extracurricular activities we've asked him to do. So in the meantime, I will be serving as the chair of the Nutrient Monitoring Council. However, if there's someone who has a burning desire to be the chair, please let me know, and we can certainly make that happen.
I suppose people can just hold their hand up right now. I think there's a way to do it, Trevor.
Sure.
Hey, thank you so much. Stick around. We'll get some questions answered for you too.
I have one more slide to talk about here, Todd. I'm not quite done yet. One more slide just to announce this, something new that we just found out about this past week. USGS announced that the Illinois River Basin system has been chosen as the third next generation water observing system. They'll be looking at the entire Illinois River Basin. What this means is they're going to be doing a lot of intense monitoring using some new technology and sensors and state-of-the-art measurements, looking at modernizing their data storage and technology. So they're going to be focusing on water quality and nutrients and harmful algal blooms. So over the course of the next year, they're going to be having outreach stakeholder meetings. So stay tuned. We're excited that they chose the Illinois River Basin. It was between our basin and the Maumee in Ohio. So hopefully the outcome of some of this research and data collection can help answer some of our questions we're having, such as why we're seeing such large increases in some of our basins and certain nutrients. And that's the website listed there if you'd like to know more about that project.
Thank you, Trevor.
And
I appreciate it. I have questions for you in just a bit. Trevor Sample, of course, has joined us. and he is with Illinois EPA. Stepping back just one to Kristi Jones from Illinois Department of Ag. There was a question that was answered in the chat section. If you've not been following along, you probably should open that up and take a look. They asked whether BMTs are being tracked by IDOA. The answer to that question is clearly yes, they are, and it's in Chapter 4 of the Biennial Report, so you can pick those up right there in the Biennial Report. I see now that Mary Beth Falsey, has opened her presentation. She is the Water Quality Supervisor with DuPage County Stormwater Management, where she's responsible for DuPage County's compliance with NPDES permit for ILR 40 and leads efforts on watershed planning for impaired waterways. How are things in DuPage County today, Mary Beth? And I appreciate you being with us as well.
Sure, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay and see my screen?
We can.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Mary Beth Falsey. I'm the Water Quality Supervisor at DuPage County Stormwater Management. Today I'll be giving an update for the Urban Stormwater Working Group. So the Urban Stormwater Working Group members are listed here at this slide. As you can see, there's a variety of members, including state and local agencies, nonprofit organizations, and universities, all of whom bring a unique perspective to the group's discussions. We've got a lot of members of this working group. So I'll just go through our 2020 meetings and summarize what we've talked about at these meetings. We've met 7 times so far this year, and we have 1 more meeting scheduled for December. So our April 6th meeting was kind of a general check-in. There were some partner updates from members, as well as updates from the education and tracking subgroups. I'll go into those 2 subgroups a little bit more later in the presentation. So at this April 6th meeting, the group also agreed to monthly meetings to help keep things moving forward. At our May 12th meeting, Jeff Edstrom gave a presentation on the Illinois Coastal Management Program and talked about the on-site disposal systems in the Coastal Clean Waters Program. And then Allison Newbauer gave a history of the University of Illinois Extension's Lawn to Lake program. On June 9th, we had Tony Heath talking about the lessons learned from the community listening sessions. I'll just mention DuPage County had the benefit of participating in those listening sessions and found them very interesting and informative. We also had Lisa Merrifield give an update on the Equitable Green Infrastructure Summit and just some lessons learned from that Green Infrastructure Summit, including keeping projects simple, emphasizing co-benefits, the need for green infrastructure careers, the need for education at every level, and the importance of building relationships and establishing partnerships. At our July 14th meeting, we had Christine Davis from the Illinois EPA give an overview of the GIGO grant opportunities. John Sloan talked about the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center, which is along the Mississippi River. And then we had Jeff Edstrom review the Illinois Coastal Water Quality Trends Analysis. Next, at our August 11th meeting, we had an overview of research findings on LID implementation by Dr. Aljabeh from Valparaiso University, and Justin Keller from the Calumet Stormwater Collaborative talked about their green infrastructure baseline inventory project. Next, on our September 8th meeting, Eliana Brown and Heidi Losler gave updates on the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program. And we had Ted Kratchmer share information on the Great Lakes to Gulf Data Portal. And then finally, on our October 13th meeting, Patrick McPartland from the Kane-DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District talked about the newest updates to the Illinois Urban Manual. And we had Dr. Marshall open up a discussion about the group's resource and outreach reporting spreadsheets. So this slide, just a quick reminder that our next Urban Stormwater Working Group meeting is scheduled for December 8th. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll just give a quick update on the subgroups. The education subgroup is charged with exploring ways to provide stormwater education resources and to make audiences aware of stormwater issues. And you can see the education subgroup members listed here. The subgroup has held 2 meetings where they discussed the resource repository, the Stormwater 101 template, and my colleague Mary Mitros from DuPage County Stormwater Management discussed ways to engage the public in stormwater issues. The tracking subgroup is the other subgroup, and that's charged with determining metrics appropriate for tracking stormwater BMPs, which can be challenging due to MS4 reporting methods and limited staff resources of both permitting agencies and the permittees. So you can see the tracking subgroup members listed here. The tracking subgroup held a meeting this year to review our tracking efforts and discuss a grant collaboration effort to create a green infrastructure platform. So that's my summary of this year's activities. I should also mention that if you're interested in any of these topics and did not attend the meeting, all of the meeting minutes and agendas and presentations are available on the NLRS website. So if you'd like more information, if you're interested in any of those topics, that can be found there.
Mary Beth, thank you very much.
Right.
Stick around. We'll get some questions if there are any for you in just a few minutes here. We'll move on quickly now. If you can stop sharing your screen, and we'll have the Performance Benchmark Committee open up the screen there. Cindy Skrukrud is with us from Illinois EPA. She's the Clean Water Program Director for the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club, at least until the end of the year when she's retiring. Congratulations. I guess you get to do at least one more presentation before you go. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, Cindy.
Thanks, Todd, and good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so why don't we, actually, we can move on to the next slide. The Performance Benchmark Committee was formed to guide and evaluate the progress that Illinois is making towards its nutrient reduction 2025 benchmarks and the ultimate 45% reduction goals. Next slide. That slide will shows you the members of the committee who represent the diversity of engaged stakeholders that we need working together in order to keep making progress towards the strategy goals. And I want to give a specific shout out to Trevor Sample, who's really listened to the committee members' concerns that we need to be constantly tracking our progress. Obviously, the year 2025 keeps getting closer every year, and Trevor has worked very hard to gather all possible metrics to track what is happening on the ground and at facilities, and incorporated that into our 2019 biannual report in the new adaptive management chapter. Next slide. Our committee met in October and we discussed these 3 topics. I won't recap the second item as we've already heard from Reid on his work on the new scenarios. We also talked about making adaptations based on what we can learn from other states. So this morning's presentations provided a lot of fodder for the next discussion of this committee. Next slide. So regarding tracking nutrients from point sources, Trevor went over the methodology that he's using right now to calculate the 2019 loads, which the committee will review when they are ready. If you'd like more details on those methods, you can review the slides from the committee's October meeting. US EPA is also continuing to help states track their point sources progress, so those resources will be incorporated into the 2020 load tally. Next slide. Then the committee reviewed how load reduction progress was reported in the 2019 report, and we supported continuing to use the same formats in the 2021 report. So for water quality data, these 2 graphs, which show you both nitrate levels and phosphorus levels, will be updated with an additional 2018-2019 data column. Next slide. For ag practice implementation, this type of graphic will be used for scenarios, including the new scenarios that Dr. Christianson has developed. Here, the blue bars show the implementation needed to reach the 45% reduction goal, while the aqua blue tick mark shows what is needed to meet our 2025 target. And then here, the brown bar shows current implementation of each practice. And this is just an example for one scenario. Next slide. For point source implementation, we'll use a graphic like this, and columns summarizing the loads in 2019 and 2020 will be added to this graphic. And then the last slide. So we also talked about what will go in the adaptive management chapter. It will also include a section on future resources and needs, as the 2019 report did. Resources that need support include such things as the role that our soil and water conservation districts play as the frontline delivery system for both state and federal ag programs, available and needed financial resources for wastewater treatment facilities, upgrades, urban stormwater best management practice, and ag BMP cost shares will also be discussed. New funding is also needed for water quality monitoring. As you heard from Trevor, currently IEPA only has funding for the USGS super gauges through the fall of 2021, and Illinois EPA's own monitoring program has been scaled back in recent years. We know Illinois Extension has played a major role in strategy implementation, both as facilitators for the strategy many committees, our 2 watershed coordinators, and in pulling the biannual reports together. Their contract with IEPA runs through February 2021, so we need to be finding funding to continue to support their work. Another major concern is that the state's Partners for Conservation program is set to sunset with this fiscal year. That program currently supports Illinois' Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, our soil and water conservation districts, and ag BMP cost share programs. So we have many needs that must be addressed if we are to continue to make progress on strategy implementation. Senator Villavam introduced Senate Bill 3462 this year, which would extend the Partners for Conservation program for 5 years and increases funding to cover many of the needs I've outlined already, including strategy administration, water quality monitoring needs, such things as the cover crops incentives program. So with this year's truncated legislative session, the bill did not move. So as soon as the dust settles from the election, I'll know more about the potential for addressing these needs in the current legislature, either in the veto session or the lame duck session in January, or whether a new bill will need to be introduced for the 102nd General Assembly. I'll put a link to a fact sheet about Senate Bill 3462 in the chat if you'd like to learn more. And please reach out to me if you have questions and want to help bring more resources to our state's nutrient strategy implementation. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. As you heard, I'm retiring from Sierra Club at the end of the year, so I'll put my contact information starting January 1 in the chat. Mila Marshall will also be taking over this work on behalf of Sierra Club, so I'll also put her contact information in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, congratulations again, Cindy, and thank you so much. And thanks for updating what's been happening with the Performance Benchmark Committee. Again, if you have questions for Cindy, you can post that at the end of well, you can post it and I'll get to it here at the end. Just one more presentation to go through. This one from the communication subgroup, at least in this portion of our webinar for the afternoon. Kate Gardiner is here. She's a visiting outreach associate with Illinois Extension and the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, where she's been working on nutrient issues for the past 2 years. I see, Kate, that your presentation is coming up. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Todd. It's good to be here. So the communications subgroup, there we go, is made up of a diverse group of partners from all the different sectors. And the objective is to educate elected officials, government staff members, professionals, contractors, business community members, and residents throughout the state about the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico, the strategy and opportunities to participate. We met virtually on October 14th this year, and I presented on the NLRS Explorer, which is an Illinois NLRS educational toolkit that we've been developing to raise awareness of the nutrient strategy. The communication subgroup agreed on the need for this type of outreach and approved taking the toolkit to the full policy working group. So the NLRS Explorer is a digital toolkit that shares educational resources relating to the Illinois nutrient loss reduction strategy, and it showcases especially resources from the partner organizations, and I will show you how it works. So this is a video that Illinois Indiana Sea Grant's Hope Charters made to show how the toolkits work. The NLRS Explorer was based on the Sea Grant Weather and Climate Toolkit. And if you want to check it out, you can visit the link that Lane Kanoki is sending in the chat, and it'll show you how it works, and you can play around with it and see what you think. And that is how it works. And if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or feel free to reach out anytime to my email at kgarden2@illinois.edu.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate you taking the time with us very quickly this afternoon. There is at least one question. Trevor, if I could have you turn on your microphone, maybe you can read through this with me as well so that I get everything correct on this. The monitoring provided by the superstations seems essential. It seemed like Minnesota and other states have managed to monitor all of their major river systems, often enough to develop some trends. Does IEPA, IDNR know what source of funding other states are using that Illinois has not used, or are they managing similar analysis with less data? Do you have an answer to that question?
I don't know what sources other states are using, but I'm not sure that other states necessarily have the super gauge, continuous super gauge network that we do. I know Kentucky has a few of those gauges. So all of the information that I presented from Dr. McIsaac was all done largely in terms of the water quality data from the basins on our ambient network, and then the any USGS flow gauges that are established close by or co-located with our stations. So it's really trying to keep the, that's a separate program, and that's separate from the super gauge monitoring that's done, but we do want to keep that going. With their 5-year report coming up, we will be including that as well in the next biennial report.
And so just for clarifications for me, the question was about superstations. Those are different than super gauge, or was?
No, I'm sorry, they're same thing.
They're the same thing. And so I think Cindy, if you can turn your mic back on, I think you mentioned in your presentation that these are funded through 2021 in Illinois. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. I mean, Trevor can answer better the latest on that, but they're funded through the water year that ends in September of 2021. And this,
That's correct.
this bill that I talked about is designed to help provide funding for those monitoring stations going forward through 2026.
Okay, I think we have all of the questions answered at this point. Thank you to both of you for taking just a moment with us. Let's move on. We'll begin to wrap up our day here. Eliana Brown is with us. She's going to talk about the biannual report and the data and the production schedule. She, of course, is a water quality specialist with Illinois Extension and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, where she's been working on nutrient issues for the past 6 years. Eliana, I really want to have everybody open their mics up and give you a big round of applause for putting the program together today.
Well, it would be applause for everyone, because it's definitely this is a team sport for sure.
It is indeed, but I know you carried a heavy load, so we really appreciate that. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Todd, and thanks to everyone for being at our very first virtual NLRS workshop. So I am here to talk about the 2021 biennial report. It almost seems unimaginable that it's already that time again to be putting together a biennial report, but it is. And I'm just going to give you some reminders of some of the contents of the biennial report and some of the things that we will be putting in it, and some of the things that we hope to be getting from policy working group members and working group members. Okay, so to remind us all, the way that our biennial report is structured is that we follow this logic model. Now, earlier today during Matt Lechtenberg's talk, when he was showing us what Iowa does, you probably saw their measures that looked quite similar to this, and there's a really good reason for that. And that's back, those of you that were working on the strategy back in 2016 may remember that the Ag Tech subgroup had Dr. John Lawrence from Iowa come talk to us about their measures of success, and we then adapted that for our Illinois usage, and we have this logic model, which is what we use to structure the report. So I'm going to focus here on these first two, the resources and outreach. During the day, we also talked a little bit about this reporting spreadsheet that during a couple of our working group meetings from Ag and from Stormwater that we were doing an extra look at. And those spreadsheets are data that we get from our partners, and it allows us to be able to show what nutrient resources and nutrient outreach that's happening. So for both the Ag and Stormwater partners, we've worked to tweak these spreadsheet up just a little bit in partnership with Dr. Anna Marshall, who analyzes our outreach data. We've set up a focus group that is meeting, I believe, next week to change things just up just a little bit. It won't be a huge change, but then we'll send that out to everyone. And you can see in red here is the due date of January 31st of 2021. We ask that you send that to Kate Gardiner at kgarden2@illinois.edu. And I'm also going to put a note here that, and a note of thanks too for Albert Cox with the IAWA, who put together our spreadsheet from the point sources. and he coordinates that and gets that to us. So it follows this very, very similar format. Some examples of what that looked like in our last report, just some really quick examples from agriculture that allowed us to be able to show the funds that are supporting the ag sector in the state. Here on the left, we'll add a 2019 and a 2020 column to that. And then looking at the many presentations and field days, those kinds of things. And we are well aware, of course, that while 2019 was a normal year, 2020 was anything but. So there are some ways that we are talking about to be able to make that very apparent during this next report. And just carrying that on, this is the similar information that we got from the point source sector with the significant investments that were put into facilities and also their conferences and field days that they host. Okay, moving on to the third measure, the land and facilities measure. Just to remind everybody that these data are supplied from our agricultural, federal, and state funding. Our ag tech subgroup coordinates that. And also then for the point source, the records that come from the facilities in the state, and Trevor Sample at the Illinois EPA coordinates that information for us. And oh, I didn't finish part of that slide, but anyway, the stormwater, it's federal and state funding and MS4 reports. So that also comes from the Illinois EPA, and those of us at Extension are going to be looking at a few of those MS4 reports like we did a couple of years ago. So just giving an example of what those data then look like in this last report. It's just example. I just wanted to remind everybody this is what it then looks like when we put it all on here. And as Kristi Jones mentioned, we are not deviating from the last report. Essentially, we will be adding a 2019 and a 2020 column for these. And this is just information from the point source bringing that along. Okay, then our last measure is our water measure. So the idea, of course, being that resources help fund outreach that then create more land and facilities, which then we should see water quality improvements in the state. And we represent the information regarding water in the science assessment. Thank you, Dr. Greg McIsaac, who puts that information together for us. Examples from our last biennial report are here. So that is where just giving you the examples of what that looks like. We also, within the biennial report, I have mine right in front of me. I don't know very many of you, if you have yours right in front of you, but I happen to have mine right in front of me. And the thing that I think that's really interesting about this report, and one of the reasons it's so thick, is that we also, in addition to the data that we report in here, we also contain updates from the partners. And there's a lot of partner programs. We are really fortunate in our state to have that. And we get that information from you good folks that are doing the work on the ground. So we are, again, putting up the due date of January 31st, 2021 to have narrative updates from these programs. If you've given us one in the past, please give us one again. The link that we're looking for is like a half page to a page. We don't want to limit that, but we also want to make sure that it's concise, but you have a lot to report. Please give us your information, and that will go to Kate Gardiner at kgarden2@illinois.edu. Actually, I'm going to go back one more slide on that. One thing I also wanted to just point out on that is that although this is a narrative, there is room within this for having graphs or any kind of metrics. We would really love to see your metrics, and we'd be happy to work with you on any kinds of putting together some other graphs or infographics with you on that. If you get it to us by that time on January 31st, that makes it much more easy for us to be able to do that. And just an example of, this is basically kind of a table of contents for the partner reports for agriculture. And you can see the breadth and number of programs that we are blessed with in our state. So just reiterating, we do want your program metrics. And if you have the graphics, we would take any graphics, but it's even best if you can have them in vector format, which these are some examples of what vector format are. And then another request. So my talk, I should have just started by saying everything is due January 31st, and I'm requesting lots of things from you. We also are requesting your photos. We certainly would love to have your photos that you have of your programs in whatever sector that you are in. I have written here, partner photos make the biennial reports more meaningful. We really truly believe that, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think that picture on the left that Jennifer Jones supplied for us is a really great example of that. Showing things that are happening right in the field, showing the activities that happen in Illinois. And yes, due January 31st to Kate Gardiner, kgarden2 at illinois.edu. So Kate has put together some categories of photos based on our last report, since again, we're going to be carrying through a very similar structure from last time's report, but we would really like to have fresh photos for this. So here are several categories that we are hoping to be able to get. We always can use great photos of our water bodies, of to show the rivers and lakes that we are working to improve. In the agricultural sector, just general photos of fields, producers, farmers, from outreach, the ag field days, those kinds of things. The land and facilities portion of that, if you happen to have photos of all of our various BMPs, that's great. And then specific to programs, that's fantastic too. For point source, general would be any photos of wastewater treatment plants and workers within the plants. On your outreach, any conferences, plant tours, things of that sort. And then for facilities, anything like the specific phosphorus reduction facilities. Like last time MWRD gave us some very nice photos of their Austera system. For urban stormwater, or what constitutes general, would be pictures of storm drains and just some general rainstorm photos. Outreach are those green infrastructure, rain garden tours, those kinds of things. There's a nice outreach about what to do with leaves, so leaf information and natural lawn care information. That's really good. For land and facilities, those are all of our stormwater BMPs, such as those listed here. And then the very, very elusive photos are of the photos of working group meetings. I must admit that if you are trying to find the worst place to have photos, in a conference room with fluorescent lighting might be the worst situation for trying to have photos. But don't let that dissuade you. If you have taken any photos at any of our working group meetings, please, please, please send them to us. And we would like to have any of them. And I know there are very few opportunities in 2020 to make that happen. But so this is an extra special plea for that. Just some technical notes of the kinds of photos that we're looking for. Basically, the more DPI, the bigger the better is good. But phones are so good nowadays with being able to take photos that phone photos are generally work very well for this. And I asked the graphic designer what kind of format was best, and he said just whatever format the file was taken on, that would be whatever is best. So just rounding out and hopefully ending up here pretty soon, just want to give a quick outline of the production schedule that we have set forth. I'm going to say to you that what I have up on the screen is actually like the second half of the production schedule. There's actually a first half. There's a lot of steps that go into producing the biennial report. Very, very many of those steps are done by the policy working group partners, and a lot of that is getting that data, sharing your data with us, which we really appreciate. So but at some point, and I won't go into detail here, but the next slide will put in red here aspirationally. So I'm going to put it is hopefully, don't hold me to this exact date, but what we're shooting for is to be able to get a first draft to the policy working group by April 15th, and then give you a couple of weeks to give us comments back to us. That has worked really well in the past and we really appreciate your reviews. The comments are always amazing, and we welcome every single comment that you give us, because what we are aiming for is to have the highest quality report that we can have possible, and your comments, your data, all of the things that you give to us, that is what makes the report better. I didn't put it in red, but having things by that date and on this schedule would make it possible for us to hit the August 31st, 2021 goal. Lots of things can make that delayed, and we will always keep the policy working group up to date should we have some delays, so that you can know when to expect the report next year. So that's all that I have. Thank you all again in advance for the data that you will be giving to us. And I guess, Todd, if there's any questions.
I didn't see any. So I think we are.
So I'm off the hook?
Yes, I believe that is the case. Okay,
well, great. Well, then, Todd, I believe that we're able then to go ahead and go towards the wrap up. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So we're just going to finish out here and just say, it's time to wrap up our first virtual workshop. But first, we do need to acknowledge the retirement of one of our strategy's founding partners, which of course you all know who I'm talking about, because Cindy, you mentioned it during your presentation. So I just have a few things to say. Cindy Skrukrud has been a member of the policy working group representing the Sierra Club since the beginning of the nutrient loss reduction strategy development. She served on the Performance Benchmark Committee, Urban Stormwater Working Group, Urban Stormwater Tracking Subgroup, and Communication Subgroup. She's been a tireless and dedicated advocate for clean water, and through the NLRS fostered collaborations among groups among multiple sectors. Cindy, we just really appreciate you and want to thank you for all of your time and effort that you've put in, not just to the nutrient loss reduction strategy, but for all of your work at the local watershed level, especially the Fox River Study Group. Cindy is leaving things well in hand by onboarding her successor, Mila Marshall, who will be representing the Sierra Club going forward. We want to welcome you, Mila. And Cindy, we wish you very well in retirement, and you are always welcome to attend future NLRS meetings and activities.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's so very nice. And you notice I did give you my home email, so yeah, maybe I'm having a bit of separation anxiety. So people, please keep in touch. It's been so great working with all of you.
Well, it's been an absolute honor to be working on this effort with you, Cindy, and we really appreciate you. And yeah, I'm going to keep note of that email address.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for today.
Well, and on that note of thanks, on behalf of the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy Steering Committee, I'd like to thank Todd Gleason. Todd, you did a wonderful job today. Thank you very, very much. Today was definitely a team effort. So I also want to give big thanks to Dennis Bowman, Kate Gardiner, Lane Kanoki, Jennifer Jones, and Dan Horn. And thank you to the NLRS Steering Committee of Christine Davis, Trevor Sample, Kristi Jones, and Brian Reniker. Here on the slide, you can see the strategy website. It's just a quick link to get there. Once you're there, there is meeting materials and check back for 2021 meeting announcements.